here. Thank you all for being here. At the end, I'll say Purim Sameach because we are going to be closer to that. It's always hard to give a lecture for me about Purim because it is a rabbinical festival. Yes, there is a literature about Purim and about the scroll of Esther, etc., etc. It's not such a spiritual festival. That's what we spoke about last week, where Rabbi Soloveitchik was the one who quoted, many ideas that it is the external festival. It's the festival of costumes. It's not so unique and spiritual and life-changing. It can be. Today, I'm going to give a little bit of a different topic about showing you some of the deeper messages that other rabbis say about Purim. I'll start off the lecture with an article by Rabbi Haskell Lookstein, and then I'll go into a lecture by Rabbi Lam. And, they have different ideas about Purim to Rabbi Soloveitchik, and I did find these two articles quite interesting. First of all, let's start off with Rabbi Haskell Lookstein's article, How Should a Jew Party? Many people have different types of parties on this earth. I remember growing up in December in Plettenberg Bay, South Africa. Whoever's been to Plettenberg Bay, my parents' home, when they had a home in Plettenberg Bay, used to overlook Central Beach, which is where they had the New Year's Eve celebrations. And whoever went there, I don't know if they still have those big celebrations in Plet on New Year's Eve. I'm not so sure they do. But in the 80s and the early 90s, they would have 10,000 people on the beach all night long, music, etc., etc. That was a huge party. That was the first time I ever saw what a party was on a mass scale. Then when I went to live in America, that changed things to a completely different level. Now, I'm not trying to say that doesn't happen in South Africa and Cape Town, because again, I, was a very observant Jew in my teens and 20s. So I didn't go to these big parties and drinking parties and all this type of thing. But when I went to Los Angeles, I did hear about parties. I even got invited to one or two of them. I didn't attend them. I'm sure they would have been eye-opening, let's just say that. But I remember friends of mine spending $50,000. I don't even want to say friends of mine. They were acquaintances. Not that I'm judging them for what they do with their money, but $50,000 just on the DJ for one night for a personal party. I mean, I wasn't earning $50,000 in a year. They were spending it on one night in Hollywood. Cannot believe it. When I was looking up how much people spend on parties, so, many people had $1 million weddings, $1 million functions. Donald Trump had $1 million wedding. His son-in-law Jared Kushner had $1 million wedding. Brad Pitt had $1 million wedding. Beckham had $1 million wedding, etc. All these famous people spent so much money on a party. Now, I remember some people I've spoken to about this told me they used the word sick. It made them sick when they heard how much people spend on one night. I'm not going to say that word I'm not passing judgment. If people have money, they can spend it how they want. But Rabbi Lookstein gives an interesting opinion about what a Jewish version of a party is based on the Megillat Esther. Why? Because in the chapter 9 of the Megillah, which is near the end, and it's mentioning all what the Jewish people did at the time of the Megillah. It says they gave gifts to their friends, and they ate and they drank, and they had a big party once they were saved. That is in chapter 9, verse 19. But 3 verses later, in chapter 20, in verse 22, when Mordechai is writing what should happen in the future, not what they did that year, but what they should do in the future, he adds in matanot le'evyonim. He adds in, we should give gifts to our friends, and we should eat and be labadic and drink wine, etc., etc., but we should also give charity. And why is Mordechai inserting there that they should give charity in the future, even though when they actually celebrated Purim that year, when they actually saved, They didn't give charity. So why did Mordechai insert that into future generations? That is Rabbi Lookstein's question. And he wants to answer that Mordechai was teaching that any Jewish party should, by definition, involve charity. You're going to spend money, and big money, on your weddings, on your bar mitzvahs, on your whatever it is. There should be an equal amount spent on the poor. And that's what Rabbi Lookstein's saying. He was saying how he actually knows Jews in America who, when they are having parties, dollar for dollar, will give money to the poor as much as they're spending on their own parties. Now, I don't know a lot of people who do that. I do know a lot of people who spend a lot of money on their own parties. I myself went to a 21st birthday party. Listen to this. And I'm not bragging about this because I don't think it's something to brag for my opinion. But I went to a 21st birthday party in New Jersey of a friend, and I just tagged along. And they said, we're going to a 21st birthday house party. So to me, a house party is when you go to someone's house. No, this was a party that the 21st-year-old was given the house for his party. His birthday present was, Mom and Dad said to 21-year-old, here is a home for you. This is now yours. Some people would look at that as it's an investment in their kid and they're just giving money to their child as an investment, a future investment. I looked at it as, wow, I've never known anybody who was given a home as a birthday gift at the age of 21. So I was just wowed. I couldn't understand what exactly was going on. So, in response to those types of people, because I doubt those types of people were giving the $600,000 to charity at the same time as they were investing in that in their child's, investment. But Rabbi Lookstein was saying that he knows people in America who do this thing. Maimonides, chapter 2, number 17 of his laws of the Megillah, he says that it's better to spend money on charity than it is to spend on giving gifts to your friends or spending on sushi and steak or whatever you're going to eat for your meal. Even though when the Jews actually celebrated Purim for the first time, at the time of Haman and Mordechai, etc., they didn't give charity. But Mordechai inserted it showing that really, you want to be happy as a Jew, you got to share your wealth. I think that's quite an amazing idea, very hard to live by, because when you're spending your couple of $100,000 on weddings or couple of $100,000 on weddings and bar mitzvahs or whatever you're going to be spending, you don't always have that extra cash to spend on the poor. But according to Rabbi Lookstein, that's exactly what Mordechai inserted to tell you that yes, when you look at the big scheme of things, your own parties are not as valuable as making sure that everybody else has rejoicing as well. There has to be some type of balance. This is my own, invert into what Rabbi Lookstein was saying. Why is it that Mordechai inserted that we should be giving charity at the time of our rejoicing and our parties? First reason I could think of is by us giving, there's a self-interest there, that by giving it makes yourself happy. So on Purim, when you are trying to be happy, it's not that you're giving charity only to make other people happy. You're giving charity to make yourself happy. A spiritual healer once told me the quickest way to make yourself happy is to make somebody else happy. So it might not just be about the others, it might be about ourselves as well when we give charity. Another one is it's very difficult to completely be happy when you know that other people are starving and are troubled out there. So the more that you can give, the more that you can say, I gave as much as I can, there also, it helps you to be happy as well. Also, the whole is bigger than the sum of parts. That's Gestalt psychology. Likewise, when you go to Jerusalem, when you go to Tel Aviv, when you go to a city where everybody is Jewish, everybody is celebrating Purim, there, or at least in the areas that you're in, not everyone in those cities are Jewish, but if you're in the areas where everybody around you is Jewish, which is the majority of those areas, you can see that everybody deserves to be celebrating. And that's why it's so important to give the charity, because it makes you happy, it makes them happy, and it makes the society as a whole happy. And again, the whole is bigger than the sum of parts. Also, maybe Mordechai was teaching you, teaching me, teaching all of us that, yes, when you're having parties, there's a tendency to put a lot of emphasis on the decorations of the flowers and the napkins and the pictures on the wall and the greeting cards and the invitations and the thank you cards, etc., etc., etc. But there is no end. And that's how some people that I met could spend $50,000 on a party at night. And some people can spend $1 million on a wedding. And because that Mordechai probably knew that that does happen, that's why he inserted that at the time that you're having parties, guys, remember the poor, because there's a tendency to go overboard. And lastly, just priorities. I can't justify to myself spending that amount of money on a wedding. $1 million on a wedding, to me, I can't even get my head around it. I would love to be at one of those weddings. Obviously, just like I'm sure all of you would like to be. What an amazing experience to see, 10,000 flowers instead of 1,000 flowers. Now there's 10,000 or 50,000 flowers. Amazing, amazing to see. But again, get your priorities right. You can't really spend $1 million and give $1,000 to charity. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make social sense. At some point, there's going to be a revolution if there are too many rich people, too many poor people. So, spread the wealth. And that's what Mordechai was inserting, even though they didn't do it in the year of Purim. But forever after, we learn the lesson that we should be somewhat cognizant of the poor at the time of our parties. Okay, that's lesson number 1 of Rabbi Luxstein. Number 2, he mentions that there's a concept in Judaism that we learn, that you should celebrate your personal miracles that happen to you. Now, some people, they have an amazing event that happens to them in their life, like they get healed from a sickness, or they escaped a narrow car crash that someone could have died and no one was killed. And it's an event that they will think about from time to time, but there is no celebration of the fact that there was some salvation. Rabbi Luxstein says that by the fact that the Megillah says that we should celebrate B'chol Shana B'Shana, that's the expression, from each and every year onwards from that time, he's trying to say that anything that happens to either the Jewish people at a national level or to you on an individual level should be celebrated, just like Mordechai said that we should celebrate Purim. He goes to the point of saying that he's obviously a Zionist, and he says that we should celebrate as a religious festival every Yom HaAtzmaut, every Yom Yerushalayim, anything that happened to the state of Israel on a national level should be a cause of religious celebration. Likewise, anytime that one is healed or one is saved from anything in particular should be a yearly event of religious dedication and devotion to that date. That's what he thinks Mordechai was trying to teach us. Now, again, it's hard to say that you should celebrate in any particular way over any particular thing that happens to you. That God has given you the right to decide. It's not in the Torah. It's not everlasting. You can choose how you want to do it or not. But I like the idea that Rabbi Luxstein is pointing out, that Mordechai actually thought that there is a religious dedication that should happen at least once a year to remember events that really changed your life for the good. And I like that idea, because otherwise, if you don't make that effort, eventually it gets lost, and maybe in your old age you even have forgotten about those things. So that's why Mordechai said every year you need to make an announcement to yourself. You need to do something to remember those happy events, and that's what Purim teaches us as well. And lastly, Rabbi Luxstein says that how do we show our gratefulness to God? How do we? So gratitude is a feeling that you have. But how do you increase that feeling? Go and do actions that show that you're happy. Go and drink a glass of wine. Go and give gifts to your friends. Go and give gifts to the poor. Do actions showing that, it's not just a thought deep down in your consciousness, but it's something that changed your life, that has changed it permanently, that you live with on a day-to-day level, at least celebrate it once a year. And those are the obligations that Mordechai suggested that we do, because we show our gratitude by doing actions. And that is, I think, quite a deep lesson. Don't be lazy, don't be apathetic, especially if it's a life-changing event. Always remember those things, especially in times of trouble. That's when you should be thinking all these positive things that have happened. And obviously, one good thing leads to another. The more actions, the more reminders that you do, the more you are appreciative and grateful in general. Those are 3 lessons that we learn out from the Megillah. Okay, good. Let's go to the next topic, which is Rabbi Norman Lam. So Rabbi Norman Lam is the one who gave me smicha. He was literally the one who said, okay, I am agreeing to give you your rabbinical ordination. I didn't know him well. He's a very, he passed away not quite recently, in the last few years. So of blessed memory to him that I'm saying this. What an interesting guy. Just tell you one little anecdote of a story, just to bring you a smile, because we're about to go into Purim. So I walked in with another person. His name was Yoni. Rabbi Norman Lam, I guess he didn't have enough time to give everyone a personal one-on-one, because he's meeting so many people. He was the head of Yeshiva University, as well as the head of the large synagogues, as well as the head of foundations, as well as a writer and an author of many books. So he didn't, unless I guess you were family or very close with him, I don't know how much time he spent with people individually. I only met him once or twice individually. And as I say, it was with another person. So I go in there. I've already passed all my rabbinical tests. And he starts testing me about things, nothing to do with what I'd learned in my smicha, nothing. But I knew that was the case, because I had been told that he asks you from all over the place, just to see if you have an idea of what's going on in the Torah and Judaism. I would say, to be nice to myself, I'd say I got a 75%. Okay, if I was being nice. I probably got more like a 60 or a 40 even. I don't know. He was asking about things that I'd never heard of or really back of my mind once upon a time. But I did enough to pass, in his eyes at least. And he had a nice conversation. You're from South Africa, great. What are you going to do after your stuff? What are you going to do after you get your ordination? Oh, Rabbi Lam, I've actually decided I'm going into business. Business? You learned for all these years to go into business? Why would you do such a thing? We've given you so many skills. Why are you going to business? Oh, Rabbi Lam, I've had enough at the moment. I've been in the institution world for many, many years now. I just want to spread my wings and, find out what else is out there. I've always had a keen idea about business. My father was a businessman, explore. So this is what Rabbi Lam said to me. He said, I'm giving you smicha so that every time you call to the Torah and they call you as a rabbi, you feel guilty about not being a rabbi, and you go back to being a rabbi one day. Unbelievable. That's what Rabbi Lam told me. Obviously, he said a little bit in jest, but I couldn't believe what he was telling me. I was laughing with him. It was very funny. The other guy in the room, Yoni, was laughing as well. Turned out I ended up becoming a rabbi as well in the future in many different capacities in America, here now, etc., etc. So his prediction came true. And that's the Rabbi Lam that I'm quoting now. So he wrote an article called Neither Here Nor There in 1968. And I'm quoting some of the stuff from his article over there. There is an expression, kimu v'kiblu, one of the most famous expressions in the Megillah. It's also at the end, chapter 9, verse 27. And it pretty much says that the Jews confirmed what had happened to them, and they took upon themselves to observe Purim in the future however, Mordechai had set out. So the expression there is kimu v'kiblu. They confirmed what had happened and they accepted for the future. Rabbi Lam says it makes more logical sense to read, if you were going to write this, you should have written it in the opposite. You should have said, they accepted what had happened, v'kimu, and they confirmed in the future what they would do forevermore. He doesn't like the order. The order is a little bit funny. It should have been, they took upon themselves to observe Purim in the future, and they confirmed it, that it was going to be like that forevermore. But it says it in the opposite way. And he wants to say the reason for this, the reason why they accepted, that they confirmed first and then accepted for the future, as opposed to accepting and then confirming, is to teach us a very deep lesson. And this is where the depth of Purim is very different to Rabbi Lam's teacher, who was Rabbi Soloveitchik. Again, Rabbi Soloveitchik was saying that Purim is not such a spiritual entity. It's not that important. Rabbi Lam was coming along and saying something very different to his teacher. Again, there's a lot of things that they said the same, a lot of things they said different. But Rabbi Lam says that when the Torah was given to the Jews at Mount Sinai, there's an expression in the Talmud. I wrote it down here. It says, Kafa aleim har kegigit. It's almost as if God suspended Mount Sinai and held it above the Jewish people and said, you better accept the Torah, because if you don't accept the Torah, I'm dropping this mountain over your heads. Now, again, it doesn't mean that the mountain was lifted and it was going to be dropped on the Jewish people. But what it means is, and this is Rabbi Lam explaining, how much choice do you have when you have a godly experience to believe in God? How much freedom is there in that moment when you're hearing God speak to you, where you're seeing miracles going on through one ear, through the other? Every orifice of yours is consumed in an experience of God. This week, I met someone who is convinced that he has had godly experiences, felt God, felt it throughout his body. He said he came to Cape Town. He lives in Fresno. Came to Cape Town just to experience and pray to God in the beauty of God. Just looking at Sea Point. All he wanted was a house to pray and to look at the beauty. That's what he told me. So yes, when you're having a godly experience, it's very, very difficult to feel any doubt that there is God or anything at that moment. I know that I had that when I saw my children for the first time. I've had it a few times in my life. Some of you here maybe have had it more times than me. Some of you maybe have never felt that you've had a godly experience. But when you're feeling it, there is no other way to say, to describe that moment other than, give in to whatever is going on. So that is how Rabbi Lam and myself for sure envision where at Mount Sinai, where whatever you normally hear, you saw, and whatever you normally saw, you heard. All the senses of the human body were so confused because it's such a godly experience. So you don't get brownie points for believing in God at that moment, okay? There's no virtue in believing in God at that moment because you don't have a choice. Likewise, Rabbi Lam wants to say that when you're in the Holocaust or you're in a tragedy where it's a mass tragedy that's happened to lots of people that you know, you can't give criticism to people who lose faith at those times, because those people don't have a choice either. When you're surrounded by death and gas chambers and negativity and sorrow, what choice is there to be positive? Not a lot, or at least not a whole lot. Now, Rabbi Lam does say that there are people like Job, Eov, who said things like, where's the quote from Job that I wrote down? Job wrote, though God slays me, yet I will still believe in him. Yes, there are some unique individuals out there who will have faith no matter what. And those people are unbelievable human beings. But the majority of people who went through the Holocaust lost their faith. And you can never point fingers at someone like that. And this is Rabbi Lam saying this, and me certainly am saying this. You can never judge someone who doesn't have faith based on one of those, Rwanda, Hutu versus Tutsi, whatever they were, I forget the names. But when you see a genocide, very, very difficult to ever be positive and ever live a positive life again in your life. And Rabbi Lam says, that is what happened at Mount Sinai. And that is what happens when Jews lose faith as well. He quotes in the section of the Tochacha, which is the rebuke, where God's giving the rebuke. This is a little bit after that rebuke. So I think it's in Parshat Nitzavim, where it's chapter 31, verse 70 of Deuteronomy. There's a verse there that says, and Israel shall say on that day, because God is not in our midst, have all these evils befallen me. So the Jews were saying, because God's not with us, all these evils are coming to us. The Seforno, classic commentary in the Torah, says on that verse, he says, what does it mean when the Jews were saying that God is not in our midst? It means that the Shekhinah, there was a siluk Shekhinah, there was a removal of God's presence among the people. Rabbi Lam explains the Seforno to me, that it's almost like a catch-22. So we lose our faith in God. God's presence leaves us. And when God's presence leaves us, we lose even more of our faith in God. So it's kind of like a slippery slope that happens. And yes, it's possible, according to the Sephora Rabbi Lam, for God to detract from this world at certain points, at least detract from our lives at certain points, where we don't feel that godly presence. And that's what Rabbi Lam's trying to say. At those moments, you cannot blame the Jewish people. You cannot blame you as an individual. When you're just not feeling it, you're just not feeling it. There's nothing else that you can do. Where is the important factor of faith? And that's why he calls his article neither here nor there. That's the article that he wrote. And you can probably find the article online, neither here nor there. He says the important factors is the regular days, where you're not elated on Mount Sinai and you're not thankfully in the gas chambers at the Holocaust, because in both of those situations, you've lost your freedom of choice. But what did God tell you in the Torah? God says in numerous places, I'll quote you just two, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 26, or Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, but there's a few. Behold, I've set before you a blessing and a curse. I call heaven and earth to witness today that I've set before you life and death, blessing and a curse, and you shall choose life. You only get that freedom when there is the option of a blessing and a curse. When you're on Mount Sinai, there is only one option, it's called blessing. And when you're in the gas chambers, there is only one option, it's called curse. But the 99% of life is not those elated options of on Mount Sinai, and it's not the 1% either on the other extreme of being in tragedy. Most of life, for most of history, is living normal to day-to-day activities, going to work, taking your kids to school, fetching them from school, traveling, trying to make a living, trying to, whatever it is, most of life is normal. That's where you have the freedom to choose life. And what Rabbi Lam says the message of Purim is, and this is the reason why there's a different order in Purim of Kimu v'Kiblu, is because at Mount Sinai, we were forced to believe in God, and we were forced to accept the Torah. We didn't have a choice. That's the Talmud, that the mountain was on top of us, etc., etc. At Purim, where there was no mention of God in the Megillat Esther, where everything happened ordinarily like you would read in the newspaper. This person said this to that person, That person said that to this person. It got the cogs in the motion, and the Jewish people were saved in a very regular way. The king changed his edict. There was a war. Some people won, some people lost. We got saved. The question is, how do you see the Purim story when it's just normal? And that's the message of Kimu V'Kiblu. We accepted the Torah for the first time with true intention, where we had true freedom, where we didn't have a Mount Sinai, a miraculous experience going on. We had, how do we see the situation? Do we see it as one king changing an edict? Or do we see it that Hashem is pulling the strings at every level, even though there is no God's name in the Megillah? Hashem is involved as much there as he was at Mount Sinai. And that's the message that Rabbi Lam teaches, that Purim teaches us, that the true acceptance of the Torah and morality and searching for God did not happen at Mount Sinai, which was a forced experience, but rather it happened at the time of Purim. And that's why Purim is so important. And that's what Mordechai was trying to teach us. I'll just end off with a couple of quotes by Rabbi Lam. And again, you don't have to agree with Rabbi Lam. You know, I thought to myself a little bit different to him with regards to a few points that he made. But I'm just going to quote you a couple of them just so that you can get an idea of what he says. A moral act is authentic only if it issues out of a genuine freedom of choice. The Torah is meaningful only if a man is free to accept it or reject it. Spiritual life is senseless when coerced. And that's what he wanted to say, that we were coerced at the Mount Sinai. And that's where, to me, I disagree with that a little bit, because I don't believe the Jewish people were really coerced at Mount Sinai to accept the Torah. To me, it's more a case of, I do agree with, like, what other option do you have when you have a godly experience? I do agree with that. I don't love the idea that we were coerced to accept the Torah at Mount Sinai, but it is a statement from the Talmud, and there is an argument in the Talmud over there in Shabbat 88a over were we coerced to accept the Torah or not. So if how much coercion is there when you have a religious experience? I'm not sure, but certainly at Mount Sinai, I imagine it was the most coercion ever that the Jewish people have had, because it was a whole nation accepting spirituality. But that's the one quote that Rabbi Lam says, and I'm going to read that last one. Spiritual life is senseless when coerced. I think that that's a very important lesson for religious families to teach their kids. Now, it's one thing to teach the children to be religious and to be observant and to keep all the traditions, etc., which I agree. I mean, any parent is a dictator. At some point, you can't let your kids decide for themselves. You've got to give them a direction. So kids need a direction, they need boundaries. So you have to teach your kids at some point. But at the same time, one also has to ensure that children know that they have freedom of choice, because any spiritual life is senseless when coerced. So children should know that they should have freedom of expression to choose whichever life it is that they want to live as well. Obviously, that's a lesson that you have to teach them a little bit older. But I think that that's what Rabbi Lam's trying to teach us, that at Purim, we didn't take on the laws of Purim, the lessons of Purim when we were coerced, because there was no coercion from God. Esther's name herself means secret. There is no name of God in the Megillah. All these things are to point out to us that we need to see the deeper levels of things where we're not coerced to see the depth, and we make an effort to do that. That's the lesson of Purim. I'll read you one other one. When God is neither present nor absent, when he is neither concealed nor reveals himself, when fortune neither smiles at us nor frowns at us, that is where our freedom is greatest. When life is neither here nor there. That is where Rabbi Lam is telling us Purim teaches us, because Purim is that time of neither here nor there. he goes so far as to say, and again, I'm quoting Rabbi Lam, the real test of acceptance of the Torah is not Shavuot, when the Torah was given, but it is Purim. Unbelievable. From Kimu v'Kiblu, when we accepted the Torah willingly, where God didn't put any miracles in the air, there wasn't anything crazy going on. That's when the Jewish people were Kimu v'Kiblu. That's the deeper lesson of Purim. And I want to leave everyone with that. Purim part number 1 was Rabbi Soloveitchik's version of it being a very external festival where you have to fake it until you make it, even if you yourself are going through a depression or anxiety or any negativity. You have to present that, you have to dress in a costume and present that you're happy, because it's not about you, it's about everybody. That was part A. And part B is Rabbi Soloveitchik's student, Rabbi Norman Lamb, saying that there's something very deep in that externality, because the externalities are rarely where the freedom of choice exists. Because in the deep meditations and the deep spiritual entities, as well as the other extreme, which is the extreme depressions and stuff like that, you can never judge yourself or others, because it's impossible really to have freedom at the extremes. But when you're at the top of the bell curve, in the middle, where you can have the blessing or the curse, or you can choose to see the miraculous or just to see the events as news in the newspaper, that's where you have the freedom of choice, where you want to live your life. And the lesson of Purim is Esther, the Megillah of Esther. There is God in the secrets. There is God in the movements of the regular world. The more you can choose life, which is what God told us to do in Deuteronomy, the more you understand the lesson of what Mordechai was trying to teach us by observing Purim every year since we've been doing it in the 4th century BCE. Thank you, everyone. I want to wish you now a Purim Sameach, a happy Purim, whether you want to observe it just by wearing the costume, whether you want to really accept the Torah without any coercion and live a spiritual life where you're not forced to do that. You choose which Purim it is that you want to observe, but bottom line is, as long as you're smiling, that's what we're meant to be doing. Thank you all for being here, and whoever's in Cape Town, stay healthy, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Whoever's around the world, also stay healthy, but won't be seeing you, but at least have a l'chaim for me. Last note, you're not meant to drink a lot on Purim. Some people, I thought that I gave the impression last week that I was saying that it's a great thing to get drunk. Not at all. It's never a great thing to get very drunk. On Purim, it's the one time that the rabbi said you can get a little bit tipsy, because in that vulnerability, you understand that there's a faith in God that is promoted on Purim, but don't really get drunk. I definitely don't want anyone to do that, and especially don't drink and drive if you are going to drink. Stay at home, maybe have a glass of wine and say cheers. Okay, cheers everybody, thank you. And now I'll say cheers.